All right. Well, we got a couple stragglers. That's all right. We'll get started anyhow. So, yeah, I'm just going to do a quick market update. Nothing's really changed from last month. The market is picking up a little bit, but still pretty slow. Someone at the last meetup asked about commercial real estate. So I'm going to just do a brief summary about commercial real estate in comparison to residential. And it kind of ties into some of the advantages commercial real estate has to offer over residential. So we can kind of talk briefly about that. And then just whether or not it's time to sell. So when I'm trying to think of ideas for these meetups, I've been hosting these for about 4 years now. And I've kind of run out of topics to talk about. I've kind of covered everything at least once. I've had mortgage brokers and inspectors and accountants and yeah, covered a lot of the bases. So usually what I talk about comes from clients talking to me about things. And I was contacted by 3 clients in the last couple of weeks, all asking if they should be selling their properties or wanted to discuss, what it would look like to sell their properties. And they bought, in the last 2, 3, 4 years. They're thinking now might be a time to exit. So that's kind of why I figured that this might be a good time to talk about if it is time to sell. So just a market update. It's really, like I said, it's very similar to what it was last month. In the spring, when they started increasing interest rates, the market came to like a standstill. So by like May, June, things kind of stopped, almost dead. Things have picked back up in September. I noticed things started moving a little bit again. We're nowhere near the chaos that we were in a year ago or even 2 years ago. Things are moving a bit, but a lot of expired listings, a lot of canceled listings, motivated sellers are having to kind of aggressively drop their prices if they want to sell, and unmotivated sellers are just either leaving their stuff on the market or just letting it expire and then not selling. Interest rates are expected to go up, I think on the 28th of this month, 26th or 28th soon. That's projected maybe another 0.5% interest rate. That might slow the market down again. We could see prices do another adjustment. No one has a crystal ball, but it doesn't sound like interest rates are going to be coming down in the near future, so likely back up. But as we know, they're increasing interest rates to curb inflation, and the other side of that is a recession. So they're going to basically raise interest rates until the recession starts, and then everything's going to come crashing down, and then they're going to have to slash interest rates to bring it back up again. So it's a balancing act. Are we at the beginning of a recession? Probably. How long and how ugly it's going to be, I don't know. But the interest rates that they've been bringing have put a lot of people that have variable rate mortgages or that have been renewing their mortgages under a lot of pressure. So I know people that their mortgage payments have gone up $1,000 a month. And luckily, as much as everyone hated the stress test that came in that made everyone qualify for 2% higher interest rate, that's saving a lot of people right now because they were at 3% and now they're 5% on their mortgage, but luckily they were qualified at 5%, so they're okay. If they hadn't have introduced that, I think you'd see a lot more people underwater right now, but people are having to make some lifestyle changes, right? Their payments have gone up, so less dinners out and maybe not buying that new car or whatever it is. To try to make sure that they can afford to keep their house. So just commercial real estate. So obviously commercial real estate is just real estate for the purpose of generating income or generating returns. So that could be cash flow or appreciation, whatever it is. So if you buy a house and rent it out and you're collecting income and it's going up in value, that's essentially commercial real estate, even though it's not commercial real estate, it's just a residential house. But multifamily falls into commercial real estate, industrial, storefronts, subdivisions, basically anything that isn't a house where you're living in it as the owner is commercial real estate. As I just mentioned, there's a lot of different asset classes and a lot of variabilities. There's obviously your storefronts and your restaurants and when we think commercial, typically that's what we think. But again, multifamily falls into that category, which is residential, industrial, even subleasing and stuff can all fall into the commercial real estate avenue. Now, the biggest difference between commercial real estate and residential real estate is the value is based on its ability to generate money. So it's usually based on its net operating income, which is the income minus all the expenses leaves you with the net operating income. And then that number is used to calculate a cap rate or a capitalization rate. You take the annual net operating income and divide it by the purchase price, and that gives you a cap rate. It's going to give you a percentage. And that might be 2%, 5%, 10%. It's usually based on the risk and the required work for the property. So 50-unit apartment building in downtown Vancouver is very low risk, very stable asset. You're not going to have income loss risk. It's obviously not going to lose value overnight. So that's going to offer a very low cap rate. You might see like a 2% cap rate from something like a multifamily in Vancouver. And then something high risk, a commercial property like the one in the picture up in Port Hardy, that they have a really hard time placing tenants in, and there's constant turnover and the population's decreasing. That's going to have to offer a higher cap rate to incentivize investors to take that additional risk to go buy that asset. So you might see 7%, 8%, 10%, depending how high risk it is. You can change the value of commercial real estate by changing the income or changing the expense without even changing the building itself. So if you have two identical buildings side by side, and one is at market rent, generating $200,000 income, and the one beside it is the exact same building, but it's only generating $100,000 income, those two properties are going to be worth a very drastic different price, even though they're the same building. Because again, you're going to value it based on its income. There's pros and cons to that. If you buy an underperforming asset, if you can get rents up, if you can reduce expenses, you're going to increase the value of the property, and you might not even need to spend any money to do it. The downside is when you see mass inflation and you see property prices skyrocketing, residential property prices, that doesn't necessarily mean that commercial is going to go up, because commercial, if you haven't increased the income or you haven't reduced the expenses, you're not necessarily going to see it go up in value. So it doesn't follow the roller coaster of real estate prices the same way that residential does. So it's kind of a safe place to park money if you're in a bit of a downturn. The financing is also based on the income. So sometimes the bank will want a personal guarantee from you to buy the property, but quite often if it's a 100-unit apartment building for whatever, $50 million, you're not going to qualify for that mortgage to pay for that building. It's the building itself, the income from the building itself, that is going to qualify that building. So that's something to keep in mind. If it's a smaller building, you're buying a 4-plex or a 6-plex, your personal ability to cover the mortgage might be taken into consideration. But on the bigger stuff, it is the property itself, which makes it very hard to get lending on underperforming assets. If you have a property that is rented below market value, they're going to base the value of that on the income. And so you're going to have a hard time lending at the top value amount if it's really under-rented. So you either need cash or you might be 50% down or 60% down until you can get that property stabilized, get the rents up, then look at a refinance. But they don't care the value of the building, they don't care the value of the land. They need to know that building has the ability to cover the debt, and it's called a debt service coverage ratio. And usually it's about 1.2, 1.3. So you need to make 20 or 30% more than the operating costs of that building before the bank's comfortable lending. Typically, with commercial real estate, lots of people buy primary residence, their houses. That doesn't mean they know anything about real estate. People that are buying commercial properties are usually fairly savvy. They understand business, they understand financing, they understand profits and losses, which can be a good thing because you can negotiate things like vendor take-back mortgages. If someone has a really low interest rate on a mortgage, the seller is going to be aware of that, and they'd be willing to port that mortgage to you. or let you assume that mortgage. So there's lots of deals that can be worked out. They might be interested in a joint venture, things like that. Whereas people, when you're trying to buy a residential property, typically the sellers don't really even know what a vendor take-back mortgage is. It can be complicated. It can also be very simple. I really do like commercial real estate because it's kind of like whatever you want it to be. Everything's open for negotiation. If you're looking at a commercial building and there's an existing business in there, there's fixtures in the building that might be owned by the landlord, there's fixtures that might be owned by the tenants. Everything's open in negotiation. Even things like if you're buying a building, the company might go with it. You might be able to buy the numbered company that owns the building instead of buying the real estate itself, which will save you on property transfer tax. If you're buying the building and the business that's in the building, there's things like the name of the company, the phone number of the company, the website address of the company that need to be taken into consideration. There's been lots of times where people go to buy a piece of real estate and there's a business involved and they think they're buying that business. And when they take possession, it turns out that that gym or that restaurant retains the rights to the name, the website, the phone number, and they just take that and they go open another restaurant somewhere else. And you don't actually have the restaurant that you were buying. So that's when I say it can be complicated. You need to understand when you're buying commercial real estate, what exactly are you buying? And everything's open for negotiation essentially. But I do recommend using a real estate agent that's familiar in commercial real estate because you don't want to end up buying something and then on completion day realizing that it's not at all what you thought you were buying. Commercial real estate's landlord friendly. Usually it's 5-year leases on commercial real estate. It can be a lot longer, it can be a lot shorter. After that 5-year commercial lease is up, it's open for negotiation again, and there is no 2% cap of what you can increase that rent. You can increase it to market value. If it was $15 a square foot, you can bump it to $25 a square foot when that lease comes up for renewal. Again, it's a negotiation with the tenant, but the landlord has a lot more rights. If they fail to pay rent, you can basically just lock the door and move all their stuff onto the street and say, here you go. Actually, you can actually seize all of the assets in the property and sell them to recover the lost expenses. Definitely not something you can do in residential real estate. So a lot of people do like commercial real estate because of the flexibility that it offers landlords. Is anyone familiar with the term triple net? Anyone heard that before? Triple net, total net, or just net. I don't even like triple net because that's getting confusing now. What that means is the landlord is going to pass all of the expenses associated with that property onto the tenant. So that could be some of the expenses or all of the expenses. So usually if it's triple net or total net, if your property tax goes up, you make the tenant pay that. If your insurance goes up, you make the tenant pay that. If your utilities go up, you make the tenant pay that. So basically you do an adjustment every year and say, this is what the property tax was, this is what the insurance was, this is what all the operating costs of the property are, and you pass that on to the tenant or tenants, and they have to pay it. So as you're increasing, your costs are increasing annually, that's not an expense to you as the landlord, that's just an expense to the tenants. So that's really favorable, especially what we've seen in the last few years where interest rates are climbing drastically, repairs and maintenance are going up, utilities are going up, things like that. You're not going to see your cash flow continuously dwindling because of that, because you're going to pass those expenses on directly to the tenants. And again, everything can be negotiated, even repairs and maintenance. There are scenarios where the landlord basically just owns the land and it's up to the tenant to repair the building. If the roof starts leaking, that's the tenant's problem, that's not your problem. That's not very common. Usually the landlord is responsible for the outer shell of the building, but all of the interior, all of the finishings inside the building are usually tenant improvements, which means the landlord's not responsible for them. If the toilet breaks, if the carpet's worn out, that's not the landlord's problem, that's the tenant's problem. So you can see how it's much more beneficial to landlords than residential tenancy. Keep in mind, if you're looking at buying a piece of commercial real estate, especially if it's vacant, you might have ideas popping in your head about what that property could be used for. You might say, oh, this is a fantastic location for a restaurant, or this could be used as a gym, or whatever your vision is. Your vision when you're buying it is really irrelevant if you're not going to be the one opening that business. And typically you're not. You're just going to buy it, and whatever tenant who's in there is going to use it for whatever they intend to use it for. So just don't be shocked or surprised if you buy a piece of property, you think the ideal use is this, and the tenant decides, no, I want to go a completely different route and do something totally different, right? So if you're buying a property with a certain vision in mind, you might want to kind of let that go because it might not be going that way. Does anybody have any questions about commercial real estate before we move on? I know that was a pretty brief summary. Yeah.
Is cottages considered to be commercial real estate as well, like maybe couple or as a cottage resorts?
Cottage, yeah, absolutely.
Which categories they will refer to?
So cottages would fall under recreational property, and recreational property, yeah, it would fall under commercial because a bank isn't going to give you a residential mortgage on that. They're going to give you a commercial mortgage on it. So again, it's going to be dependent on the income of the property. So just speaking of rent and increasing rent, I know a lot of people have a lot of increased costs on their properties right now, and this kind of ties into whether or not it's a good time to sell or not. Property tax has gone up, insurance has gone up a lot, and if you have a variable rate mortgage, your mortgage payments have gone up pretty drastically. We were held to no rent increases for the last 2 years. I believe this year they allowed a 1.5%, and next year they're allowing a 2% in 2023, which is nowhere near inflation. Inflation, it claimed, is about 8%, and they said that they were going to cap rent increases on residential properties at inflation. And as soon as they admitted that inflation was 8%, they said, actually, we're not going to allow that. We're going to bump it down to 2%, which is ridiculous. Our costs as landlords have skyrocketed. And they're basically not allowing us to increase rent to cover those additional costs. However, this is right from the residential tenancy website. Landlords can apply for additional rent increases when the landlord has incurred a financial loss from extraordinary increase in operating expenses of the residential property. We've seen that. As all the costs I mentioned, property tax, insurance, and the mortgage on your interest, or on the interest on your mortgage as well. Or if the landlord has incurred a financial loss or the financing costs purchasing the residential property, which is kind of weird wording. If the financial costs couldn't have been foreseen under reasonable circumstances, I don't know what that means. That sounds like a big gray area to me. But between those two things, we have seen extraordinary increase in operating costs for our property. And the reason they put this policy in there is if you can claim essentially hardship. If you can no longer afford to keep that property and you're running at a deficit to hold on to it, and you can say, hey, look, I've been put in a really bad situation. They basically give you the opportunity to pass that bad situation on to the tenants. I don't know anybody, you do have to apply through the Residential Tenancy Act to use this increase. And I don't know anybody that has yet. But again, this is kind of new charted territory because our expenses have increased drastically. So I think this is something that's going to be more and more commonly used. So I'm kind of eager to hear if other people have implemented it and if they have succeeded in it. Have you had any experience?
We're close. It's funny you should bring this up. Maybe 2-3 months ago, I was looking at properties that look at a fourplex. Rents are like 60% below the market.
Yeah.
But the landlord won't qualify because his mortgage is very low.
Right. Right.
They bought it like 10, 15 years ago.
Right.
So I can't find a way to show a loss because when you go through that process, it's very, very, very detailed.
Right.
And every little penny that is being spent on that building. Right. So unless you're showing a loss,
Yeah.
or you just enjoy filling out government forms.
Everyone loves government.
How
forms.
much loss do you have to show?
I don't know, and I'm assuming they
You
would
have to show
probably.
a loss.
Yeah, but how much? Like, what's the
You
minimum
loss.
loss you have to show?
A loss.
I'm gonna,
It's just a loss.
I'm gonna guess they'll only allow you to increase the rent enough to cover the loss. So if you're out $10 a month, they're only gonna let you increase rent $10. If you're at $1,000 a month deficit, I can see them allowing you to increase it enough. And then again, this falls under hardship, and the hardship is kind of a blanket thing that falls under even like strata. If there's a plus 55 rule and you end up having a kid and they want to kick you out because you're no longer under that 55 or plus 19 rule or whatever it is, you can claim hardship and say, hey, if I sell right now, I'm going to be in a major financial loss because the market's just taking a downturn. And you can claim financial hardship, and that basically trumps bylaws or residential tenancy. So, but you have to prove that. You have to prove that you are in a very dire situation. But again, people with variable rate mortgages, if they have a $700,000 mortgage and it's gone from 2% to 6%, their costs have just climbed astronomically, and they are running at a substantial loss, which again, I have multiple clients that have contacted me and are contemplating selling because they're in a situation. This might be the solution to that, right? If you can just pass that on to the tenants and do rent increase higher than 2%. If anyone does this and succeeds, let me know. I'd be eager to hear how it went. So on to the main topic, is it time to sell? So I've been asked this by quite a few clients, and it's pretty difficult to summarize in a yes, it's time to sell, no, it's not time to sell. And that's for all of the reasons listed on the left. Every property is different. Every investor is different. Your strategy for the property can be different. Your goals of what your property is trying to do for you is going to be different. People have different risk tolerances. Every financial position is different. You might be able to have a property bleeding if you're in a really good financial position. Other people, that they can't subsidize the property, right? Selling real estate costs money, something to consider. And what you plan to do if you do sell, okay, that's great. What do you do with the cash? So we're going to kind of go into each one of these. So the property itself, you have to ask, like, how passive is it? Is it you've had long-term tenants in there and it's totally easy, they just pay rent every month and it's just an easy pleasure to manage that property? Or is this something that's just a thorn in your side and you're sick and tired of it? And you shouldn't necessarily take your emotions into consideration when you're looking at investments, but let's face it, we all had some properties where we're just like, I don't care how much money it's making, I want to cut that sucker loose, right? Are there capital expenses coming up? And that's not necessarily a good thing or a bad thing. If the plumbing and the electrical and the roof all need to be done in the next couple of years, you're probably not going to recoup any of the money on those capital expenses, because those aren't lipstick renovations and you don't typically get that back when you go to sell. If you spend $20,000 rewiring a house, you probably didn't just increase the value $20,000. Whereas if it's all cosmetic repairs, it needs flooring, it needs a paint job, and maybe some countertops, you might spend $20,000 doing that and increase the value of the house $40,000. So keep that in mind. If there's some upcoming expenses, are those going to be expenses that you can shell out that are going to make the property more profitable, make it more money, or are those just going to be expenses that you're never going to recoup? That's something to consider. Location of the property. So this is actually a house of mine in Prince George. And on the left-hand side there, it's a 12-unit apartment building. And on the other side, I think it's a sixplex, or maybe it's a house and then a sixplex. And that particular property is on 3 city lots, and it's 11,000 square feet, and the current zoning is multifamily. That is not my favorite property as far as management or cash flow goes. The only reason I'm holding on to it is what the future potential of that property is. So that's something to take into consideration. Is there latent value? Again, that could be the potential for subdivision development in the future, or maybe it's under rented. If you have tenants paying 50% of market rent and you can find a way to get do keys for cash or get that rent up, and then it can perform a lot better. That's something to consider. If you're hemorrhaging money, you might be able to solve that problem by getting rents up. If rents are already at market value and there's nothing left that you can get out of the property, then that's something to consider as well. How much capital is in the property? If you bought a year ago at $900,000 and you put $200,000 down, and it's now worth $750,000, and you're going to have some fees selling the property, you essentially don't really have any capital in the property. So what's the point of selling if it's still cash flowing, if it's still paying down debt? When's the mortgage set to renew? You have a variable mortgage. It's kind of renewing all the time. Or maybe you're locked in at 2%, and in 6 months or a year, it's going to roll over to 6%. That's something to take into consideration as well. The investor. I do like this little logo with all the whys and bullseye, because the more you ask yourself why you're investing in real estate, why this particular property, why you need the money from investing in real estate, the closer you get to understanding what your goal is, what you're actually trying to achieve. How much time do you have? Again, if the property's high maintenance and you're there all the time dealing with tenants, and you don't have a lot of time, that's something to take into consideration. Or maybe it's totally passive and it doesn't occupy any of your time. Maybe you are trying to get out of a 9-to-5 job, and investing in real estate is going to enable you to get out of a 9-to-5 job, which means you're going to have a lot more time on your hands, which means you might be wanting to take on more properties, not get rid of existing ones. How much work do you want to do? If your property can afford property management and it's totally passive, that's great. If not, anyone that owns real estate investment knows it's not easy. It is time consuming. It can be stressful. A lot of people that own investment properties think that landlord, you buy a house and then you're rich. That's not the case. We know what is involved in dealing with tenants, doing renovations, dealing with contractors. It is something that affects us. How much work are you willing to do to see the returns out of that property?
Are you able to explain that to us, CRA?
Yeah, it's hard to put a dollar value when you're talking to the CRA on, your time, the hours and hours you put in. Are you winding down or are you ramping up? So if you've got a good portfolio and you're kind of thinking, okay, I'm getting close to retirement, it might be time to start downsizing, well, then maybe now's the time to cut some of the underperforming properties out. If you're trying to ramp up, selling a bunch of real estate right now is going to take you in the direction that you want to go. Again, if you're trying to get out of the Monday to Friday 9-to-5, and you're trying to do that by investing in real estate that generates cash flow, selling real estate isn't going to help that unless that property is underwater and it's not cash flowing, in which case, you might want to let go of it. All of our priorities in life change, and as you get through things, you might find that family time, friend time is much more important to you. And maybe buying real estate enables you to quit that job, which creates more family time, more friend time. Or maybe it's a burden. You're working a Monday to Friday, 9-to-5 job, and you've got 2 or 3 investment properties that eat up your entire weekends, and you've got a young family, and it's just too much. So you need to strike that balance of what your goal is and how you're going to get there. And that comes down again to your why. Why are you investing in real estate in the first place? Is it so that you can give up a 9-to-5 job? Is it so that you can pass something on to your kids? You're trying to build net worth or equity? It's okay for these things to change. They should change. I used to work a Monday to Friday 9-to-5 job. Time wasn't really an option for me. So I bought properties up in Prince George and I had them managed by a property manager because I just didn't have time. Now I have a lot more flexible schedule and I'm okay managing my own property. So I've been buying more locally on the island here and managing them myself. So I have an increased amount of time. That being said, I do value my family time and my friend time more than before. So I probably wouldn't take on a lot of properties that are going to consume a lot of my time. So that's the investor. Everyone's different. Everyone is in a different position. Everyone has a different amount of time they can contribute. Everyone has a different amount of work that they're willing to put into a property and a different skill set. So that's one more consideration. Is there anyone, any questions before I kind of keep moving through it? Oh, I want to chat. All right, I have to get out of the whole thing to check the chat. It's kind of a weird system, so I'll check it at the end. Hopefully it won't be not timely anymore. So your why is going to tell you what your goal is, right? It's up to everybody to decide what that is, what you're trying to achieve. Some people want a certain level of income, again, quite often to quit a job, or at least not be as dependent on a job as they are. You're trying to grow net worth, maybe it's just a retirement plan. Maybe you just want to buy one house and have it paid off in 25 years so that you've got that nest egg to either sell off or just live on the cash flow at that point because the mortgage is paid off. You really need to understand why you're investing in real estate, and that's going to tell you what your essentially your goal is. There's also the time frame. A lot of people are impatient and they want to be rich tomorrow. And I keep telling people, real estate is not a get rich quick scheme, it's a get rich eventually scheme. So it takes time. The longer you're in the market, the better you're going to be. If you look back at real estate prices 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 50 years ago, anybody would agree that it was a really good time to buy real estate 20 years ago because you'd be rich today if you had bought real estate 20 years ago. So if your time frame is much more urgent, unfortunately, real estate might not be the right option for you unless you're interested in doing things like flipping and stuff like that, which is a different type of investing. Obviously, that is can be large sums of money, but they stop immediately as soon as you sell, and you have to go on to the next one. So I view that more as a job, more so than passive investing. And you can also do things for personal growth, and this is something that I've kind of understood about myself recently. And sometimes I do stuff just for the sake of doing it because I know it's going to make me better, make me stronger, make me smarter, whatever it is. So an example of that is I took over as the managing broker of the Parksville and the Bowser Pemberton Homes offices. I bought the brokerages and became managing broker. If anyone knows anything about real estate or real estate agents, you can make a pretty good living as a real estate agent, buying and selling houses, working with clients. Being a managing broker doesn't really pay anywhere near what being a real estate agent pays. And there's a huge shortage of managing brokers right now for that reason. A lot of successful agents are making six figures as a real estate agent, and they'd have to take a pay cut and probably get paid $60,000 a year to be a managing broker of an office. So why would you do it? And that's what people keep asking me, especially other agents. They know how much money you make as a managing broker, and say, why would you do that? It's because of who I needed to become to do that, right? I needed to, I supervise 15 agents now. I review dozens of contracts. Owning the business, you have to understand the financials, you have to understand marketing, you have to understand client relations, you have to do recruiting, you understand the operation of businesses. And that was a huge growth for me. And that can transfer into any aspect of my life moving forward. So whether it's a real estate brokerage, or I go manage a franchise, or I take over managing a hotel, whatever it is, that's a transfer of skill into the rest of my life. So it might not have been lucrative financially for me to do it, but it was a huge step in personal growth and who I had to become to take that role on. So your first investment property might not be the most lucrative, but that's not necessarily the only reason to do it. So what you'll learn from the first one will be transferred into the ones after that. And it's just going to be a life skill, understanding how to deal with tenants, how to manage tenants, how to interview people, how to repair a house, how to deal with contractors, how to track all your expenses and all your incomes, how to put ads on Facebook for rental units when they come available. All of those things are making you better as a person. So again, if you're investing in real estate just for the money aspect of it, that's fine, and that's a consideration. But there are things that don't necessarily have a definitive financial equation that you can put on it, and personal growth is one of those things. It's something that each individual person needs to factor into their investment portfolio, their investment career. Nothing comes from easy. Investing in real estate, like I've mentioned, it's not easy. It is a fair amount of work. You're essentially running a small business. If you have a lot of investment properties, you're running a relatively large business. The rewards are the financial benefits in the end. Just like anything else in life, hard stuff is worth doing because of what you get. And I keep saying, you know, if knowledge was the key, we'd all be rock stars with six-pack abs. It's doing the action. It's doing what's hard. It's going to the gym that's going to get you the results. It's saving the money for the investment that's going to get you the results. It's taking on leadership roles. It's taking on challenges that will make you grow, provide financing, make you healthier, whatever it is. Sitting on the couch and eating Doritos and watching Netflix has never benefited anybody in any way. So don't hesitate to invest in real estate because it's difficult. Embrace things that are difficult, because that's where you're going to see yourself grow and hopefully every aspect of your life grow. So from your goal, what your end target is going to give you the strategy of how you want to get there, right? So if you already own the property, you have to ask yourself what the plan for that particular property was when you bought. Was there a 2-year plan, a 10-year plan? That's something you have to evaluate for. And again, that can change, but go back to what was the intent of buying that property. Are you focused on cash flow, maximum return on your investment, selling in the future for a large sum of money because it's subdividable or you can build on it, whatever it is? Knowing your strategy, knowing your goal, where you're headed, will define what type of asset class you should be buying. Coming with a lot of cash and having a minimal mortgage is going to generate a lot more cash flow, but your return on investment is going to suffer because you aren't leveraged as far as you could be, and vice versa. So again, you've got to find what the end result is and kind of work backwards from there, what the best way to proceed is to get that. Zoom out. So many people are panicking right now. Oh, the interest rates are climbing, the housing market's going to crash, I gotta get out, I gotta get out. I bought my first house in the fall of 2008, which was the beginning of the Great Recession, when it was all doom and gloom. I sold in 2016 for 50% more than I paid. So I bought at the worst possible time and sold for a pretty substantial profit. Zoom out. Yeah, we're going into a recession. It doesn't really matter. In 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, I can almost guarantee that property is going to be worth more money than it is now. So as long as you can afford to hold it, as long as it's not going to be a financial burden or time burden or something you can't deal with today, you have to think long term. The market's going to do this, interest rates are going to do this. What does it look like in 20 years? Again, we talk about people 20, 30, 50 years ago that bought real estate. They've been through recessions, they've been through hiccups, they've probably had to subsidize their property a couple of times, but right now, they're sure happy that they held on to that property because they paid $100,000 for it. It's worth money. Risk tolerance. Everyone is different, and that can also change drastically depending where you are in your life, where you are in your career. I've heard that, like, I don't invest in the stock market, but like GICs, guaranteed income certificates, are the safest form of investing. They pay the lowest interest rate, but they're basically a guaranteed return. So you can't really lose money. What I've been told is you should, in your stock market portfolio, you should invest, your age should be the percentage of GICs that you own. So when you're 20, you only put 20% of your investment into GICs. 80% should be higher risk, higher growth. You're trying to expand, you're trying to grow, you're young, you have time. Let's get this thing going and build something. When you're 80, you're past the growth phase, you're looking to stabilize. You should probably have 80% of your investment portfolio in something stabilized. So you can see how it changes as you go through, right? My perspective has changed as to what's important to me. I was willing to roll my sleeves up and do whatever it took to get stuff done and take higher risks, and it paid off. And it was a lot of work and it was a lot of stress. And now I'm in a financial situation where I can kind of pick and choose a little bit more. I'm not as desperate, right? So that's going to be dependent on you, how risk adverse you are, where you are in your investment. But ask yourself what can happen if there's a capital loss, which we're probably seeing right now. You own real estate, it's probably come down in value a little bit. Are you okay with that? What about rental income loss? Now, both of those things, how do they play out long term? Now, capital loss long term in 10 years, what its value is today is really irrelevant. The value of your real estate is irrelevant until the day you sell. If you're in a downturn and you sell, then you materialize, you realize there's actual losses. If you wait for 10 years and sell at a profit, there was no loss. It was just a perceived loss. The rental income loss, obviously we have tenants that move out and there might be a month or two where it's empty, or a tenant does some damage and you have to do some renovations. It takes 3 or 4 months to get a new tenant in there. There can be scenarios where there's going to be some income loss, but until there's an alternative to housing, I don't see how rental income or rental units are going to be vacant. We're so low on housing inventory, rental units and ownership, that it's going to be at least a decade, if not multiple decades, before we get caught up to where we need to be, where there's enough housing to go around for everybody. In the meantime, providing your rental units aren't horrible, you're going to be able to find tenants for them. Also, factor in, like, what's the worst case scenario? And when I first started investing in real estate, I bought 3 houses up in Prince George fairly quickly. They were cheap, and you don't need much of a down payment when you're buying a house for $100 grand. And so my mom was a little bit adverse at first. She's like, "Oh, what are you doing? What if all of your tenants move out and the market crashes and you lose all of your equity and you can't afford the payments and you lose your house and everything else?" Okay, first of all, I had bought 3 properties, each had 2 units in them, so that's 6 properties. I'm trying to think of a scenario where all 6 units are empty at the same time. Well, if that were to happen, there's probably something bigger going on that we need to be looking at. That's a bigger concern. But even if that did happen, okay, I lose everything, I lose all of my equity, I lose all of my net worth, and I have to go back to square one. Well, I can make money as a real estate agent. I can go back to the automotive industry and fix cars. I did that for enough years. My wife works in insurance. She has for 20 years. She's employable and bringing in an income. We can afford rent. We'll go rent a house at Marksville. So the worst case scenario is that I just moved from the house that I'm living in now into a rental house. And that's not ideal, but like if that's the worst case scenario, that's a lot better than a lot of people's worst case scenario elsewhere on earth, right? We're pretty privileged here that the worst thing that could happen is you have to rent a house instead of own a house. And am I willing to put my net worth at risk to grow it? I personally am, but that's a personal choice. There's also the concept that I started really with nothing, working in the automotive industry, getting paid to work a 9-to-5 job. Investing in real estate got me to where I am now. I'm a lot more flexible, I have more financial freedom, I've grown my net worth. So if I hadn't taken that risk in the first place, I'd still just be working in the automotive industry, working a 9-to-5 job and either maybe owning my house or renting a house. So worst case scenario, if I screw it all up, I just go back to where I was. It's not really a loss. That's just, I gambled, built a bunch and then lost a bunch. I'm not going to go further back than I was when I first started investing in real estate. But again, that's kind of everybody. That's a different tolerance. And as you build net worth, you might want to put backstops in to prevent you from losing all of it. there is, I forget what the name of the equation is, but there is a way that people analyze risk. Companies are supposed to do this to assess the risk. And you take the likelihood on a scale of 1 to 5 of something bad happening, and you multiply it by the expense, what it will cost you if that thing happens. So is it possible that all of the tenants move out in all of my rental units tomorrow? I'm going to put that as a 1. It's not a likely scenario. Would that be a major expense? Absolutely. I would be underwater so quickly. I have a lot of mortgages, a lot of property tax, a lot of insurance. So that would be a 5. 1 times 5 is 5. On a scale of 25, 5 is pretty low. So I just don't think it's a likely scenario. It would be catastrophically bad, but it's a very low scenario. Could there be a capital loss? Well, yeah, that's probably actually happening. I'm going to say that's a 3, maybe that's even a 4. But if I don't sell immediately, the cost is really nothing. It's negligible. If I wait 10 years, the loss of today is really irrelevant. So that might be a 4 times 1 or 2. Again, that's not a huge risk to me. So if you're trying to look at a piece of property or your investment portfolio as a whole, and you think that certain properties aren't going to perform well, or certain properties are underwater, look at the likelihood of it costing you a lot of money and the expense if it does. So if your interest rate has just increased drastically on your property and you're hemorrhaging $1,000 a month on it, that's not just a likely risk, that's actually happening. And that's a pretty major expense if you can't afford to subsidize that property. So you're going to say, okay, well, that's actually happening. So that's a 5 and the expense is a 3. Okay, now we have a real threat. So every property needs to be looked at differently. And every investor needs to look at where they are financially if they can bail themselves out if they do get underwater. That rolls into your financial position. If you're hemorrhaging money, your properties are no longer cash flow. Can you afford to keep it? Selling in a downturn, selling at a loss, and materializing that loss isn't necessarily an ideal situation. But if the alternative is subsidizing that property every single month and having to take up extra hours at your job to try to keep that property afloat, that might not be your best option either. How long can you keep it flowing? Do you have other properties subsidizing it? So maybe you have one property that's on a variable rate mortgage, or it just came up for renewal and now it's not cash flowing, and you have other properties that are now subsidizing that. So you're not out of pocket every month for your portfolio. But are those other properties going to come up for a renewal? Are they at risk of no longer cash flowing and can't subsidize the one that is underwater? Can you get rents up? So you might say this property now, because of the new interest rates or new additional costs, it's now underwater. Can you get the rents up to make the difference? If you're at market rent, that's not really an option. If you're at 50% of market rent, can you do it keys for cash? Yeah, it's going to cost you a lump sum of money up front. But if that takes you from losing $500 a month subsidizing the mortgage to generating $500 a month profit, well, that enables you to essentially hold that money through any recession and assess what you want to do when you come out the other side and properties are climbing again and you have a more stabilized asset. You bought that property for a reason. Is it still fulfilling that reason? If you bought property only because it generated $1,000 a month cash flow and that was just enough money to quit your job or finance your boat, whatever it is, and now it's no longer cash flowing at all, and that was your only purpose buying that property, you didn't care about equity build-up or return on investment, you just wanted cash flow, and it's not serving its purpose anymore, and you can't make it serve its purpose by increasing rent or cutting costs, well, it's not doing its job anymore. Maybe it is time to cut that one loose. Keep in mind, selling costs money. If you're selling a $750,000 house, it's probably going to cost you about $25,000 in real estate commission, lawyer fees, closing costs. There might be a mortgage penalty, and I am a real estate agent, and I'm more than happy to throw real estate agents under the bus. They charge too much money, but it is a bit of a monopoly. So for anyone that's unfamiliar with how real estate works, it gets listed, the seller usually gets a realtor to list their property, and they agree to pay that realtor, let's say $25,000 to sell the property. The listing realtor takes half of that, so they take $12,500, and they dangle that as a carrot to every other realtor in the area as an incentive to bring a buyer to buy that property. So half of the commission that you're paying when you sell a property is actually going to go to the buyer's agent. If you're not going to dangle that carrot for all of the realtors out there to bring a buyer, you've really limited your marketing. And it's a bit of a monopoly. It's not my favorite system. It's just the system that is in place right now. So most buyers are working with a realtor, or they're on realtor.ca, or they're having, they have a realtor setting them up on like a search system to bring properties. The realtor's driving them around looking at properties. Most people, the vast majority of people, buy real estate using a real estate agent, because real estate agents from the buyer's end are free. It's not going to cost them anything to work with an agent, so why wouldn't you work with an agent? So as soon as you aren't offering any sort of commission to the buyer's agent, well, the buyer's agent isn't going to show the property to their clients, or if they do, they're going to negotiate that buyer's fee from the seller, or they're going to go after the buyer themselves for the commission. No one likes working for free. I don't like working for free. If I come across a property that's not offering a commission, I'm going to try to negotiate that from the purchase price. So I'm going to say, hey, my commission is $12,000 on this. I'll offer you this dollar amount minus my commission, and that's how I'm going to get paid. And if the seller says, no way, I'm going to go to my buyers and I'm going to say, hey, I need to get paid. You guys have to pay me. Buyers don't like that. They'll usually walk away from the property, or they're just going to offer $12,500 less for the property than they were originally going to offer because they have to pay me. So if you don't list with a realtor, and I'm not saying use a realtor at all costs, keep in mind, if you're not offering a buyer's commission, you're going to deter hundreds or possibly thousands of realtors with tens of thousands of active buyers that are qualified and vetted that aren't going to look at your property, and you're going to sell it at a substantial discount. And people say, oh, look, I sold my house myself, and I saved $25,000 in realtor fees. And I look at what they sold for, and I know they could have sold for $50,000 or $75,000 more. So yeah, they saved $25,000 and they cost themselves $50,000. So just keep that in mind. If you really hate paying realtor fees, understandable, you can list your property on MLS. Take your own pictures, get your own floor plans done, write up your own description, do everything you need to do to post it, but at least offer the buyer commission. You don't have to pay a realtor if you list the property yourself. You don't have to pay the listing realtor, but at least offer the 50% that you would offer to a buyer's agent, because that means you now have every agent in your vicinity working for you with their buyers when it comes to buying a property. So that's my little rant about realtors. I don't like the system. I think it could be revamped so that it's, it wouldn't benefit you financially, but I think it would benefit the general public. Property transfer tax is 1% on the first 200,000, 2% on the remainder. So if you sell a house right now for $750,000, you pay a realtor $25,000 or $30,000 to sell that property, and you buy again when the recession is over in a year or 2 years, you're going to pay about $20,000 in property transfer tax, lawyer fees, closing costs. So that's going to be a $40,000, $50,000 transaction to sell a house and buy another house. So that's definitely something to take into consideration. If you think, hey, the property prices are going to drop $50,000 in the next year, I should sell and save myself $50,000 and buy back in when it's cheaper. You're not going to save yourself anything. If it drops to $650,000 or $600,000, you might be in a good scenario, but there's a good chance you won't even recoup all of the buying and selling costs if you do sell right now. Again, mortgage penalties. Right now, interest rates have gone up, so typically mortgage penalties are very small right now. It's when mortgage rates drop, when you're locked in at 6% and mortgage rates drop to 2%, that's when you're going to pay a pretty substantial penalty on your mortgage. So that's not likely a big factor right now. Capital gains, I don't know if anyone's familiar with capital gains. If it's not your primary residence, the proceeds, the profits generated from selling an investment property are going to get lumped into your personal income in that particular year. So if you buy a house for $500,000 and you sell it 2 years later for $700,000 and you make $200,000 profit, they're going to take, the CRA is going to take your personal income from that year, say it's $100,000, add $200,000 of profit, but they'll cut that $200,000 in half. You only pay income tax on 50%. So they're going to take $100,000 added to the $100,000 you already made, and now you're going to pay tax on that. So you might lose 25% of your profit due to capital gains when you sell. So that's just something, it's not necessarily good or bad or right or wrong. That's something to consider. That's one thing, in one way, real estate kind of almost acts like RSPs in some degree, because RSPs, the concept is you're working right now, you've got a decent paying job, you're making $80,000 a year, so you're in a relatively high tax bracket. When you retire, your income is going to drop to say $40,000, and you can start drawing money out of RSPs to bring that income up, but you'll be in a lower tax bracket, so it's going to save you tax in the long term. Selling real estate can be much the same way. If you have a high-paying job today and you sell, it's going to boost your income even higher. So you're going to be in a very high tax bracket. If you wait till you retire and you have no form of income and you sell a property, the proceeds of that are going to get lumped to your income, which is zero. So you'll end up in a lower tax bracket, essentially paying less tax. However, if you go to retire in 20, 30 years, your real estate will be worth a lot more money. So you're going to pay a lot more tax. But I don't know. I'm as much as I hate paying tax, you only pay tax when you turn a profit. So I'd rather be paying tax than not paying tax. One of the last considerations is, okay, you're going to sell. What are you going to do with the money? That really depends on how much capital there is. Again, if you bought a year ago and you're selling right now and you put a minimum down payment down, there might not be any capital in the property, or maybe by the time you pay selling expenses, you're at a break even. If that property is cash flowing and you're going to get $0 for selling it, why would you sell it? Even if it's not cash flowing, but it's paying off $2,000 a month of mortgage every single month, why would you sell that if you're not going to be able to walk away with any proceeds? On the flip side, if you bought it 20 years ago, the mortgage is almost paid off and you've got $800,000 equity in it, well, that's a lot of cash. What can you do with that cash? Totally different concept. Again, that's why it varies property to property. Every tax season, I run all the numbers on my property because that's when you have to get together all of your income, all of your expenses, your property tax, your insurance, every dollar you earn that year, all your repair expenses, and it's going to spit out a number of what your profit is. And that profit includes debt pay down and cash flow. And it will give you a dollar amount. Now you can divide that by the purchase price, and that will give you your basically, or sorry, you can divide that by the amount of initial money you put into the property, and that's going to give you a return on your investment. The more important number, I won't get into too many details because it is a complicated concept, but your internal rate of return is the profit you generate yearly, factoring in how much equity you have. So if you bought a house and you put $100,000 down, and 10 years later you have $400,000 of equity, an internal rate of return takes the income, the net operating income of that property, and gives you a number based on the equity you have in the property. So you have to get that number, find that equation to give you the number to tell you based on how much money you have in that property, what's your return, how much profit are you making, and is there something else you can do with it? So if you're making 2% return on your property, that's not very good. You're managing property, you're dealing with tenants, you're dealing with all this, and you could probably earn 2% by pulling it out and putting it in a high yield savings account. If that property is generating a 15% return, even without cash flow, just in debt pay down, and you're gonna liquidate that property because it's not cash flowing, well, that's great. You're still making a 15% return based on debt pay down. Where are you gonna earn 15%? Where can you put your money? And I'm not saying you can't find 15% somewhere else, but just know where it's gonna go. Because taking that lump sum of cash and investing it at 2% is a bad choice. Holding on to that property and generating the 15% is gonna obviously be beneficial. Are you gonna be moving to a higher or lower risk asset? So, hey, I've got $200,000. I think I can make more money in Bitcoin. Maybe you'll use your $200,000. So are you putting it in something that's generating a similar return with a similar risk level? Do you want to grow and expand, put it in something that's offering a higher return that is probably higher risk? Or maybe you're done with real estate and you're happy just earning 2% interest by sticking it in the bank. Also, your time. Do you want something more passive? Obviously, sticking it in the bank account at 2% is about as passive as it gets. Or maybe you have time on your hands now. You're willing to take on the management of the property for those additional returns. Just always keep in mind that we are in a time of inflation, even though we're kind of going into a recession. We're kind of at that crossover point. But inflation eats cash. So as we know, the cost of everything has gone up drastically in the last couple of years. So if you have $100,000 in the bank, you can't buy as many groceries as you used to buy. You can't put as much gas in your car as you used to. The cost of everything has increased drastically. So $100,000 in the bank 2 years ago doesn't have the same value as $100,000 in the bank does today. Your borrowing power has been slashed. So if you're going to take money out of an asset that's generating a decent return and stick it in something that's not generating any income or is generating income less than inflation, you're actually going to be seeing your money erode. It's going to be worth less and less. So just to summarize, is it time to sell? I'm not here to tell you, yeah, liquidate everything. I'm not here to tell you, no, hold on to everything forever. I do lean towards hold on to everything forever, personally, but I'm in a different circumstance than a lot of other people. I can't answer that for you. And that's why I put this presentation together. I have had people contacting me saying, should I sell right now? I don't know. I don't know your financial situation. I don't know how much you like your job. I don't know how much you're tired of dealing with tenants in the property. I don't know what you intend to do with the money when you do sell the property, what type of returns you can expect to get. It's a you choice. Only you can come up with that. Is the property, you bought the property for a reason. Is it still taking you towards your goal? You were trying to aim for financial freedom, net worth, whatever it is. If it's still moving you in the right direction, I would leave it alone. If it's taking you away from the direction you want to go, well, it's time to reassess and see if you can get back on track. I have bought assets that are not performing well the day I buy them. They are not taking me in the direction of my goal. They're really under rented. They need renovations, a lot of capital expenses. But the future is cash flow, is debt pay down. So is there potential that you can weather the storm for 6 months or a year, and then it's going to be back on track to take you towards where you want to go? Or is this thing just going to be a thorn in your side that's going to burden you and take you away from what you were trying to achieve in the first place? Is there something else that can take you to where you want to go faster? I find that real estate generates, when it's leveraged properly, generates very high returns and it's very low risk. I can't think of an asset class that can kind of consistently generate 15%, 20, 25% return on investment and be as stable as real estate is. But if you have goals to start up a company and you think it's an amazing opportunity and there's a niche in the market and it's going to succeed and you can sell your piece of real estate and start up a company or invest in something else that's going to take you to where you want to go faster, then do it. That's all I've got. That was just me talking a lot. Hopefully it was